Good morning. Welcome again to Grace City Church. My name is James. If we haven't met yet, I'm part of the team here at Grace City, and it's my huge privilege to be able to preach to you this Easter Sunday. What a good day to be in church. Yeah, that was more response than I was anticipating, actually. We've been practicing. That's great. I'm conscious that there's lots of different reasons people might be in church today. Maybe this is your church family, and so it makes sense for you to gather together with family in the year. Perhaps you, though, are visiting, maybe. Maybe you just are part of a family or a friendship group of someone who comes here regularly, and this is all pretty new to you. Perhaps you come to church on Easter and Christmas time because it feels like the right thing to do. Or perhaps you just saw Dean Lewis walking in with 5 trays of hot cross buns this morning and thought, I don't know where he's going, but I want to follow that man. Well, whatever reason you are here, however it is that you've come to be here today, we are glad that you're here. It's a good day to be in church, so welcome. It's a joy to have you here. I've just recently got back from some time away. I was at a conference and also visiting my brother in Italy. That is an incredible place. Who's been to Italy before? Wow, lots of people have been in Italy. Incredible place. We loved it, had an amazing time there. My wife's recently taken up being a celiac. I wish that she had developed a different hobby, because it means that actually we eat far less gluten-based products than what we used to. But while I was in Italy, I ate copious amounts of those products. In fact, a couple of times when I got my pasta dish delivered to me at the restaurant, they were like, would you like some Parmesan? I said, no, but a little sprinkling of extra gluten on there would be great. I would love that. So we had lots of that kind of food, and they love their cold meats and their cheeses over there. My little 2-year-old niece who we were visiting, she opened up her lunchbox and tore open this little kind of kid snack, and it was literally just a block of Parmesan cheese. And I was like, that is so European of them. You know, we ate so much, we consumed so much Prosecco and prosciutto and bruschetta. And I don't know which of those I was meant to eat or drink. I get a little bit confused, but we consume copious amounts of those anyway. And salami, loads of salami. They love their salami over there. And I'm a convert. I love salami too. It was delicious. It was beautiful. The truth is, though, I don't actually know what's in salami. I want to believe that it's just some kind of nondescript meat. I don't really know what goes in there. The truth is, I don't want to know. I enjoy it. I don't want to know what's in there. I want to believe that the meat is high grade. I want to believe that those little white bits in there are vitamins or something. I don't really want to know what's in there. I don't want to go there. I just want to kind of live in blissful ignorance. I'm just happy consuming what I think I'm consuming. And as I thought about that, I thought I think that's our attitude often to other stuff in life as well. We'd rather just not know. I'm happy just believing what I think I know about that thing. And I think our attitude can be like that about God sometimes as well. I'm kind of just happy knowing what I think I know, or thinking what I think about God. I'm happy just kind of thinking he's this happy God floating up there ethereally, sprinkling happy cosmic fairy dust on good people, making their life better. Perhaps that's what you think about God. And if it is, and that's what you've come expecting to hear about this morning, I hate to disappoint you, but that's not what you're going to hear about this morning. That's not the kind of God that we believe in actually here at Grace City. Here's a question for you. Would you want to know the truth about God, even if it was something completely different from what you previously thought? Would you want to know the truth about God, even if it was something completely different from what you previously thought? Or would you rather just carry on going, believing what you kind of believed about God in your childhood, or what Oprah taught you, or whatever you kind of feels convenient for you, what suits your lifestyle? Would you want to know the truth about God, even if it was something completely different from what you previously thought? What if it's not true what gets said at almost every funeral, which is we know that they're in a better place right now? What if that's not necessarily true? Would you want to know the truth about that? In most people's belief system, most people's worldview, the way they see the world, the universe, and their place within it is based on desire, not truth. So we believe what we want to believe. I know we've got all sorts of different people here this morning from all sorts of different backgrounds. There's different reasons why you might be here today. But I wonder, what do you think about God? What do you think about this God that we've been celebrating this morning? What do you think about the prayers that got prayed this morning? Like, people here love God. Love God, love the difference that He has made in their lives. What do you think about that? What do you think about what Christians believe about the Bible? I don't know what you think about that. Here's what Christians believe. Christians believe that God is perfect. He's perfect, and He created the world in perfection. Like that it was perfect. And He created us, mankind, within it to kind of rule under His rulership, to be at kind of in communion with, in harmony with His creation. That's what He created us for. And He didn't want like a army of robots, so He gave us this thing called free will. He gave us this thing called choice. He said, I want you to choose to live under my rulership. But what we did as mankind is we took that free will, we said, thanks, we're going to use that and rub it in your face and use it to kind of live our own way, live in rebellion against you. And that's what the Bible calls sin. And sin's a big deal. It's like a really big deal. And sin is actually what's broken this world that we live in. And I don't care how good your life is, you cannot look out into the world and think, yeah, it's put together how it should be put together. Like we have wars, we have acts of terror, we have catastrophe, we have pain and suffering and death, and none of that stuff was intended to be in this world. None of it was. But then God, the Father, sent His Son Jesus, His Son who is 100% God, sent Jesus into the world. And then Jesus He added humanity to His divinity. So He became 100% God and 100% man. And He lived this perfect life on this earth, the life that we couldn't live. And He died a criminal's death on the cross, a death He didn't deserve. And then He rose again to new life as a means of restoring creation and humanity within it back to the perfection that it was always intended for. And I don't know what you think about that. And if that's the first time you've heard that, you might be initially skeptical. And I get it. But the potential upside of that truth is too big to ignore. The potential upside is too great. Actually, the promises, the inheritance that God the Father says are for those who are in Christ Jesus are too big to ignore. So at least we have to take a look at what that is. See, from what I understand, there are almost no serious historians who question whether Jesus was a real figure in humanity. Almost no serious historians who would question that. I read an article this week in the paper. This is a secular paper. It's not a Christian article. It's written by a secular person who wrote about Jesus. And this is what they said. They said, the historical evidence for Jesus of Nazareth is both long established and widespread. Within a few decades of His life, He is mentioned by Jewish and Roman historians, as well as by dozens of Christian writings. Compare that to King Arthur, who lived around 500 years AD. The major historical source for events of that time does not even mention Arthur, and he is first referred to 300 to 400 years after he's supposed to have lived. Isn't that crazy? Strikingly, there was never any debate in the ancient world about whether Jesus of Nazareth was a historical figure. We know of no one in the ancient world who questioned whether Jesus lived. What they're saying here is there is more historical evidence for the fact that Jesus lived than King Arthur or Genghis Khan or Julius Caesar. There is more historical evidence for the fact that Jesus lived than any of those men, yet we wouldn't ever dream of questioning whether those people were actually real figures within history. The article goes on. Nevertheless, a recent survey discovered that 40% of adults did not believe that Jesus was even a real historical figure. So again, that shows most people's belief system, their worldview is based on desire rather than truth. We believe what we want to believe. And I can kind of understand that because the implications, if Jesus is real, are massive. The implications for your life and my life are massive if Jesus is real. However, these abundant historical references leave us with little reasonable doubt that Jesus lived and died. The more interesting question, which goes beyond history and objective fact, is whether Jesus died and then lived. And that's what we believe here at Grace City. We believe that literally and physically, Jesus lived and died and then died and lived. That's what we believe here. And actually, what you believe about that is of infinite importance to your life and to my life. Tim Keller, who's an author, says this: if Jesus rose from the dead, then you have to accept all that he said. If he didn't rise from the dead, then why worry about any of what he said? The issue on which everything hangs is not whether or not you like his teaching, but whether or not he rose from the dead. You have to do something with Jesus. You have to do something with him. Nobody has changed human history more than him. No one has been more anticipated or more talked about in human history than Jesus. You've got to do something with him. Nobody features in other world religions more than Jesus does. You have to do something with Jesus. But as important as his life was, it's actually what happened at the end of his life, which is really what you have to do something with. You know, there's been so much historical evidence that something happened at the end of his life. Something significant happened at the end of Jesus' life. There's been countless dissertations written about this, not even by Christian historians, but by secular historians, writing that something significant happened at the end of Jesus' life. And they've invested huge amounts of money and expertise and research into finding out what that was. And the thing is, you don't research something and invest all that resource into something that's not true. Like, nobody is writing papers about unicorns. But don't tell my 3-year-old that. She would be devastated. You don't invest all that kind of time, money, energy, and resource into researching something that isn't true. When Jesus died, something significant happened. But what was that something? Well, I'm going to fly through 4 very quick theories about what happened that first Easter. But these are theories from people who know, historians who know, that something significant happened, but they don't believe what that something was that Jesus rose from the dead. That makes sense? So 4 theories that something happened, but that it wasn't Jesus rising from the dead. Here are what the 4 most common theories are. The first one is this: that the disciples, that Mary and the other women were so distraught that they went to the wrong tomb. That's the first theory, that they were so kind of caught up in their distress that they went to their wrong tomb. I guess that's a possibility that could have happened. But if that is what happened, then wouldn't the authorities just have wheeled out Jesus' dead body and said, actually, you guys got it wrong, you went to the wrong tomb, here's Jesus here. It would have squashed the rumor instantly. So easy to squash that rumor. So that doesn't really make sense to me. They didn't wheel out the body because there was no body for them to wheel out. The second major theory is that there was hallucinations of the resurrection. That again, people were so lost in their kind of grief that they started seeing Jesus everywhere. And we know that kind of thing does happen for people when they lose loved ones. They start to see those loved ones, visions of those loved ones in different places. So perhaps that is what happened. Yeah, but here's the thing. Jesus appeared in his resurrected body to literally hundreds of people, hundreds. And so the chances of there being some sort of mass group hallucination all at the same time doesn't really make sense. Yeah, add to that the fact that actually these hallucinations lasted for 40 days, and everybody's hallucinations stopped on the same day. That doesn't really make sense either. So I think we can kind of rule that one out. The third major theory, again, these are theories about people from people who know that something significant happened, just don't believe that it was the resurrection, was the swoon theory, that Jesus, he kind of succumbed to the pain, the crippling injuries, the loss of blood. He didn't die, but he kind of fainted. He passed out. But then somehow, rather than actually rising from the dead, because he never actually died, somehow he kind of pulled himself together. He crawled his way out of the tomb, miraculously moving that stone, sneaking past the guards. And that was how the kind of resurrection happened. A guy called David Frederick Strauss, he's not a Christian, he's a secular historian. This is what he says about the swoon theory. He says it's impossible that a being who had stolen half dead out of the tomb, who crept about weak and ill, wanting medical treatment, could have given to the disciples the impression that he was a conqueror over death and the grave and the Prince of Life. So that one doesn't really make sense to me either. The fourth major theory was this, that the body was stolen, that the disciples stole the body, and that's how the kind of rumor around the resurrection started. Got a couple of issues with this one too. The first is that actually the Bible doesn't paint the disciples in the most flattering light. Like, they have no expertise apart from maybe fishing, but somehow overnight they develop these special forces, stealth-like skills to be able to sneak past the guards, somehow roll away the stone, steal the body, sneak past the guards again without being noticed. That doesn't really make sense. But even if they did steal the body, the fact that every single one of the disciples was tortured and killed for their faith, and none of them recant, none of them break with that story that Jesus rose from the dead, like, that doesn't make sense to me. If you know you stole the body, if you know everything that you're preaching is based on a lie, and you are fearing torture and death, somebody's going to break. In fact, probably everybody breaks, but they didn't. Not one of them recant that whole time. So I realize I'm arguing these theories from the position of someone who does believe that Jesus literally and physically rose from the dead. I recognize that. But when you add to the apparent weakness of those theories all this other kind of historical circumstantial evidence, for me, a pretty compelling picture for the resurrection is starting to get painted. Consider this. Consider the complete transformation of the disciples. I already said, they weren't the sharpest, brightest bunch. They certainly weren't the boldest. As Sandra shared with us last week, Peter, who was kind of the chief among the disciples in some ways, denied Jesus the day of his death to a schoolgirl at a campfire. Yet a month and a half later, he's standing up boldly in front of thousands of people declaring Jesus is Lord and preaching with such fervency, like something dramatic happened to change that man. He saw the risen Jesus. Something happened in the disciples that made them value their own lives less. Something significant. Consider this. Consider that Jesus' family thought that he was God. Think about that. I know that mums who give birth to sons think very highly of their sons, but that is next level. That is crazy. Even Jesus' brothers thought that he was God. You try convincing me that any one of my 3 brothers is God incarnate, and I'll tell you some stories. Even Jesus' family thought he was God. The third thing to consider is that women were the one who discovered him. And I know this doesn't mean a lot to us now, but back in that day, the testimony of a woman would not even carry enough weight to be held up in court. So if you were inventing the story of the resurrection, there's no way that you would write into it that women were the ones who discovered the empty tomb. You just wouldn't do it because it would, the story wouldn't carry as much weight as it could have otherwise. So there's no way that you would do that unless that's actually what happened. Fourthly, the focus of worship moved from Saturday, the Sabbath, to Sunday. And I've been in church for a long time now. I know how much church people don't like change. So the fact that they were willing to move to Sunday, that's a miracle right there. Something significant happened. The fifth evidence is that secular first century writers, Josephus, Pliny, Seleucus, they all wrote about the resurrection of Jesus. They all wrote about it. They wrote about some of the crazy things that happened at that time, some of the crazy things that happened at the temple. And these are secular writers, they're not Christians. They all wrote about, and these are people who are alive at the time, writing at that time. So more and more evidence to consider. Something happened. There's no doubt something happened. So my questions for you this morning are, what was that something, and what does that mean for you? What was that something, and what does it mean for you? In the lead up to Easter, we've actually been looking, kind of having a fly-through look at the Gospel of Matthew, which is the kind of account of Jesus' birth, life, death, resurrection, written from Matthew's perspective. And that kind of account is finishing today with Resurrection Sunday. But what's been really interesting looking at that book is learning a bit about Matthew, the guy who penned all this stuff down. And what's been interesting is finding out that Matthew actually had a religious upbringing, but he had turned his back on that religious upbringing. He had turned his back on organized religion for some reason. And maybe that's your story. Maybe like somewhere in your heritage, somewhere in your history, you had some organized religious experience, but you turned your back on it, pursued career, whatever else it might be. But then Matthew encounters Jesus, and everything changes. Everything changes for him. Maybe he turned his back on organized religion because of the hypocrisy he saw in other leaders. But when he meets Jesus, he meets a leader who's totally different from any other leader he's ever met. And this leader is preaching about this kingdom which is far different from anything else that he was forced to be a part of as a younger man. For Matthew, everything changes when he meets Jesus. And that's my heart for you this morning, actually. Wherever you're at, whatever your previous experience with religion, with church, with spirituality, with quest for meaning and purpose in life, whatever your previous experience, my heart for you is that you would meet Jesus here this morning. And maybe you already are meeting him. My heart is that you would see him for who he really is, the God of the universe, the author of creation, the God who gave his life for you, but then rose again, conquering death that was never meant to be part of our story, conquering death and conquering everything that you are battling in this life as well. And he wants to bring you into victory over those things, into the victory that he has already won. I hope that you would see him for who he really is. And I hope that you would see yourself for who you really are. The Bible talks about us being God's masterpiece, his works of art, that we're children of God. My heart for you is that you'd see that about yourself this morning, but that you'd also see that we are actually in desperate need of help, more than we ever realized. But actually we're loved by this heavenly Father more than you could have ever dreamed. My heart for you this morning is that you would see him for who he is and you for who you really are. So let's look at these few verses in Matthew. From Matthew 28, it says this: after the Sabbath, that was a Saturday, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. Then the angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. However, he is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell the disciples, he is risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now, I've told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid, yet filled with joy, and they ran to tell the disciples. Suddenly, Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. You know, if you were writing this story, you'd come up with a better line than that, wouldn't you? "Greetings," he said to them. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. In these last few minutes, I just want to look at 4 quick things. I want to look at 2 reactions that those women had and the 2 responses that they had. 2 reactions the women had and 2 responses that they had. The first reaction is this. Verse 8 says they were afraid. They were afraid. Why were they afraid? Well, they'd just seen an angel. I can tell you, if I saw an angel today, I would not carry on going about my day as if nothing would happen. Like, that would surprise me. So maybe it was the angelic encounter that had caused them to be afraid. But I think more than that, I think it is the implications that Jesus has risen from the dead that begin to really weigh on them. Like, oh wow, if Jesus rose from the dead just like he said that he would, then maybe that means he is all that he said that he is. And the implications for that are huge. The implications are that sin is a really, really, really big deal. That actually in our rebellion against God, we have offended a holy God, a perfect God. That is a huge deal. And the consequences for that are heavy. They are dire. I said death was never meant to be part of our story. That's what we brought into the world with our rebellion, with our sin against Him. That was never meant to be part of God's perfect creation. But we brought that into the world. But it's not just the once-off death that you've got to fear, actually. Actually, the Bible talks about the fact that we are trending, that we have chosen to live apart from God, separate from God for all eternity. That's the choice that we have made, and that's where we are heading, and that is a horrific consequence. The consequences are massive. And I realize that's not a popular point of view. I realize it's not very politically correct, as Israel Folau has been finding out. It's not a popular thing to say, but the consequences are really, really serious and dire for sin. And the implications are also that there's only one way back from that. Because Jesus said there's only one way back from that. He said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes back to the Father apart from through me. The implications of Jesus rising from the dead are terrifying. They are huge and they are terrifying. So they're afraid, yet filled with joy. Afraid, yet filled with joy. As devoted as these followers of Jesus were, and they were devoted followers of Jesus, when they came to the tomb, they were expecting to find it sealed and Him dead. But when they got there, expecting to find death, they actually found life. They actually found life. And the implications for that are huge and wonderful. Wonderful, actually. We have eternal reason to celebrate because our sin has been dealt with. Actually, it's been conquered. There was no way for us to pay that debt on our own. There was this huge chasm between us and God, and Jesus came in and He bridged that gap. He bridged that gap that our sin had created. He was the one who made it possible to be back in relationship with the Father again. 2 Corinthians 5 says that He became sin for us. He who knew no sin became sin for us that we might become the righteousness of God. That He took what we deserved that we might get what only He deserves. That He became what we were that we might become what He is. He came to pay a debt He did not owe because we owed a debt we could not pay. There's a song that we learned at the conference the other week, which I think Matt's going to lead us in next week's great song. And these are some of the lines in it. It says this: our Savior displayed on a criminal's cross. Darkness rejoiced as though heaven had lost. But then Jesus arose with our freedom in hand. That's when death was arrested and my life began. I love that. It's when death was arrested and my life began. It means our King is heaven's champion and we get to be on the winning team. It means that there's an alternative between this eternal separation with God and that's eternal unity with God. And that's a far better alternative. That's a far better choice to make. The women were afraid, yet filled with joy. And of course they should have been, because something deep within them was beginning to recognize that all that they hoped for in Jesus was beginning to become true. They were afraid, yet filled with joy. Finally, how did they respond? Verse 8 says they ran to tell His disciples. Now, this is the best news that the world has ever known. It's incredible. The fact that there is a way back into union with our Maker again is incredible. And evangelism shouldn't be talked about as a discipline. Shouldn't be talked about as something that we are obligated to do. You know what I've discovered? I've discovered that nobody who owns a Thermomix needs to be told to tell other people that they own a Thermomix. If you love something, if you value something, it just spills out of you. It bubbles out of you. And that ought to be how it is with us. They ran to tell the disciples. There was an urgency about their response, an urgency that's lost on me. Maybe it's lost on you too. They ran to tell the disciples. But if this truly is the best news that the world has ever known, then ought we not get our running shoes on as well? They ran to tell the disciples. Finally, verse 9, suddenly Jesus met them. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. They worshipped. In C.S. Lewis's book called Mere Christianity, he gives what I think is a really compelling argument for why you can't just believe that Jesus was a real historical figure and think that he was just a good moral teacher. Why you can't believe that that is the case. Let me read this out to you. It says this: I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, that I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. And perhaps actually that's how you view Jesus. Perhaps that's how you view Jesus when you came this morning. Perhaps you're sitting in your chair still thinking that way about Jesus. I was at a surf club function in this very room here last year, sitting on a table over there, having this exact conversation with someone who says, yeah, I'm not ignorant. I know Jesus was a real person. I think he taught some good stuff, but that's the end of it as far as I am concerned. C.S. Lewis carries on, that is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he's a poached egg, or else would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. They clasped his feet and worshipped him. All to thee, Lord, I surrender. What other option did they have? What other option do we have? What other response is fitting? Rather than to give our life to the one who gave his life for us.